Hey there, my name's Rod Yates, and you're listening to Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. Each episode, I talk to a music creator or industry professional about their life and career, the ups and downs of their journey, and the lessons they've learned along the way. And my guest today is solo artist and former Brother Cane frontman and Alice Cooper guitarist, Damon Johnson. So Damon boasts one of the most impressive resumes in rock and roll. He first came to international attention in the early 90s as the frontman for Alabama rockers Brother Cane, and when they split after 3 albums, he went on to play guitar with the likes of John Waite, Alice Cooper, Thin Lizzy, and the band they morphed into, Black Star Riders. He's also co-written songs for Stevie Nicks and Carlos Santana, including Santana's mega hit Just Feel Better, featuring Steven Tyler. We talk about all those experiences in this interview, from his days in the clubs around Alabama trying to get a record deal, to what it's like going on the road with Alice Cooper and why he had a lump in his throat the first time he walked on stage with Thin Lizzy. Just as important as all those experiences, though, is Damon's solo career, and he's determined to be remembered as much for his solo work as he is his high-profile sideman gigs. So we started by talking about Damon Johnson and the Get Ready's latest album, Battle Lessons, and how all his experiences have led to this point. So I saw a quote from you where you said that you talked about the fact that everything you've done in your career has helped shape you as an artist. How do you hear that in this new record, in Battle Lessons?
These songs just feel like the rock music that changed my life when I was a kid. The tempos, the energy from the rhythm section, it's just loaded with riffs, guitar riffs, big fat riffs, hooks in the choruses. And, I feel I really stand by these lyrics on this record. I'm proud of the stories that I was able to tell within these songs. And there's no small amount of fun included in this record as well, which is an incredible reflection, I guess, considering the turmoil that the last year has been because of the pandemic. So there's no denying, buddy, that I got it was almost therapy for me to make this record and give me something to focus on in this time that we can't go out and perform. We couldn't do shows, we couldn't travel. So I think the music is reflecting of that in the best possible way.
And in terms of it being therapy for you, do you address some of the things that have been happening in the past year on the album lyrically?
Well, 8 of the 9 songs were written before the pandemic hit. But I will say, there's one song that is track number 3. It's called Talk Yourself Into Anything. The original idea for the subject matter was a specific relationship that a friend of mine was going through. But when the song was finished and I could step back from it, and this was, in the middle of the summer, I guess is when we finally got around to recording that song, I realized that it could absolutely be directly a reflection of, what's happening in our country here in America. The concept of you were given some information and then you just believe it. You just go, okay. Or you see something and then you convince yourself that it's one way when the reality is it's something else. So here's this big, heavy AC/DC groove, Rod, with a fat, it's just one of my favorite riffs I've written in a long time. And the chorus is saying, that's how you get to sleep at night. You talk yourself into anything. Watching the news the last few months, there's no question I've thought, man, that song is nailing it. Half of our country talks themselves into things that the rest of us just feel are lunacy. So that's a long answer to your question. No, current times didn't really reflect in these lyrics, but that one has, I don't know, man, I'm starting to see the video in my head, Rod. We're going to have to...
I saw another quote from you where you were talking about the further you go on in your career, it's almost more important for you to be regarded, I guess, as a songwriter than a guitarist. At what point did that dawn on you?
I mean, guitar was my first love. Something special happened between, an electric guitar and my ability. And, it started early in high school. Like, I really took to it quickly. And, I grew up in a small town, Rod, but there was no question if some alien dropped in from another planet and said, hey, who is the rock and roll guy in this town? The entire community would say, oh, it's this guy, Damon Johnson. So, man, the guitar opened so many doors for me. It's what precipitated my move to Birmingham, Alabama, which was the big city in my state. And they had a great music scene and all that. So yeah, guitar was everything. But then this unexpected left turn happened, and I found myself also behind the microphone. That's when we put Brother Kane together. So man, all of the 90s, over the course of those tours and the 3 albums that band made, I was the principal songwriter as well as the lead guitar player. So really the guitar playing took a back seat. And I was okay with that because, man, I had a lot to learn. I felt like I had a lot of catching up to do as a songwriter. And the 90s were a time where there was some incredible music coming out. So I felt some pressure, I think, to, I guess, develop as fast as I possibly could. So when that band called it quits in 2000, I guess almost as a security blanket, Rod, I quickly shifted back to the guitar, and I embraced some really incredible opportunities that came my way in the form of just being a sideman. I played guitar for the great John Waite, and then that was followed immediately by the phone call about the Alice Cooper band and that situation, which was so much fun. And, it really took me to consistently the biggest stages I had ever performed on and the biggest audiences. And, Alice was incredible. We continue to be great friends to this day. So, I guess it felt like, in some ways, kind of a second chance, but it felt very familiar because it was the guitar, once again, that was leading the charge. Then I joined Thin Lizzy in 2011, which was the most mind-blowing thing I would have ever thought could happen to me. So that band, as you know, morphed into another band that was writing new music, kind of stamped in that trademark harmony guitar sound that Thin Lizzy was so well known for. To get to do that with Scott Gorham as my bandmate, again, just a dream come true. So that's when the songwriting chops came back for me, Rod. Those 5 years that we spent making those 3 records, I guess I just got the bug again to start singing my own songs and telling my own stories. And that's really what, manifested me deciding to leave the band, focus on my own material. Part of that too, man, is I just wanted to have more control over my calendar. I wanted to try and work more closer to home. We moved to Nashville in 2013, and we love this city, with high school kids and that kind of thing. I just felt, hey, man, what if I could balance this at a level I've never been able to in my entire career? And that is really the pulse. That's the motivation for what I'm doing right now, brother.
Yeah. And you just covered off a lot of your career in a very short space of time.
Sorry about that.
Not at all, not at all. And there are many things in there which I would like to ask you about and will ask you about. But one of the things I wanted to latch on to start with is the fact that, you said that if aliens landed in your hometown, which was in Alabama, they would, and asked who's the rock guy, people would point to you. What was that like growing up as the rock guy in that town? Were you accepted? Was there an element of being an outcast? What was the, how were you regarded?
My story in that time period of my teenage years is kind of unique in that I went to all my grade school years from kindergarten through the completion of the 9th grade. We lived in a town called Monroeville, Alabama, kind of in the southern part of the state, close to the Gulf of Mexico. And that was fantastic. And that's where I discovered rock and roll and Thin Lizzy and Aerosmith and Kiss and Rush and Alice Cooper, me and my high school friends. And that was where I put my very first garage band together. I think we started that when I was 13, and it carried over into the 9th grade. And we played a couple of talent shows and, backyard parties. And it was just, I was totally smitten. Well, right in the middle of all of that awesomeness, Rod, my family decided to move to the northern part of the state, to this tiny, even smaller town, but it's where my mother grew up as a kid. That town was called Geraldine. So, man, when I arrived in this tiny little farm town, and I was already, I played the trombone in the marching band, I was a pretty good student, I made good grades. Well, my mom already had a lot of friends in that town, so there was this talk about, Eugenia has moved back to town with her family, and her kids are going to start going to school here. So there was almost like this kind of a buzz Like, oh, you're that guy Damon, I've heard about you, right? So early on, I got invited to this party, and it was at some guy's house, and he just happened to have an electric guitar and an amplifier. And one of the football players who I'd been spending some time with, he goes, "Hey, Damon, you show him how you play, man. Play something." And Rod, that, that one night changed my life as far as my profile or I don't know, man. It was probably more than my ego was capable of processing. But, quite literally all it did is just ramp my ambition up to maximum level. Like, okay, well, if these people are paying attention, then let's see who else I can get to pay attention with my guitar playing. It just made me practice that much more. It made me dive into more, challenging things. That's when Randy Rhoads had just hit the scene with Ozzy, and I was learning Van Halen licks, and Steve Lukather from Toto was a major hero for me. It was an incredible place to grow up, and my experience was I was very fortunate that was my experience.
So what happened at that party? You got asked to play the guitar. You played. What did you play, and what was the what was the reaction?
I remember clearly that night I played Stairway to Heaven, and I fingerpicked all the slow part, and then the guy had a distortion pedal, so I kicked on that pedal and just ripped into the Jimmy Page solo at the end. And I remember this group of girls, like a couple of them were cheerleaders, and just, man, it's just the stuff dreams are made of, Rod,
There was no turning back from that point.
There was no turning back. And, I will say this, but, based on what your show is about, and again, man, I'm really thrilled to be talking to you. One thing I do want to mention, though, is that it never occurred to me during that time that playing music for a living was possible. There was no one around me that I could talk to. There was nobody saying, "Oh yeah, you can do it. Let's put a band together and start playing some gigs, and we should drive down to Huntsville and over to Chattanooga and play." And we just didn't have that. So my absolute plan, I was working at a grocery store part-time and saving my money. I went to junior college straight out of high school. And man, my plan was to literally become an electrical engineer.
Right, because you did very well at school.
I did pretty well in school. So I took all of the pre-engineering curriculum. So I got, here in America, it's called your associate's degree when you get your 2-year degree. And I was getting ready to transfer to a major university. This would have been 1984. And that's when I got a call to join a band from Birmingham. These guys were really popular. They were a regional touring act. They'd had a song on the radio. They had opened for some big bands like, Hall & Oates and the Little River Band. We all looked up to this band with great respect and held them in high regard. So they had seen me play somewhere. I got a call to join that band, and, my parents were pretty amazing. They said, "Look, you've done great in school. Clearly you're obsessed with this guitar thing. Why don't you give it a shot? You can always go back to school. Let's see what happens."
And so you moved to Birmingham to join that band. That's presumably, I guess, exposure and success on a bigger level than you would have experienced prior to that. What did you learn from that time?
Well, there's no doubt, Rod, that exposure was. I don't know that I would have ever gotten out of North Alabama had it not been for that opportunity. Seriously. Because I had been so focused on school, and I probably would have completed, the next 2 years and gotten my degree, maybe gotten a job, who knows. But arriving in Birmingham, which was the biggest city in the state, there was a tremendous music scene at that time in that there were just dozens of places to play, So I guess in a way, just like, the word got around about me when I moved to that tiny town in Geraldine, very shortly after arriving in Birmingham and starting to play shows with this band, it was even a whole other level of, I guess, awareness that people were having about, who this guy Damon Johnson was.
And so how long was it that you were in Birmingham before you moved to Atlanta? Because I know you headed there to join the band Witness.
I actually stayed in Birmingham that entire time because Atlanta was only just a couple of hours from Birmingham. You could get there, pretty quickly. Now, by that time, I'd gotten married and I had a daughter. I had a child at that time. So, it was good for them to be able to kind of be rooted in Birmingham. My wife she had gotten a pretty cool job. And so, we were starting to kind of have that part of our life as well. So the move to Birmingham happened in 1987. I played in that band there for about a year and a half. And then, yes, indeed, there was a band called Witness out of Atlanta. This was my first experience with a record company, or, this band already had a record deal. They had made an album with some studio musicians, and so they needed a band to put together to go out and tour. Well, man, all I had to hear was that word record deal, and I'm like, I'm in, let's go. So naive, Rod, so naive. You just think, oh, if these guys have a record deal, well, we're going to be on MTV, and we're going to start playing arenas, and this is going to be awesome.
What was the reality?
The reality was a lot of talent in that band, some good songs, a pretty good manager who kind of partnered up with a bigger management company, but that turned out to be a bit of a unsuccessful thing because, the band just wasn't really moving the needle. We weren't moving the needle with the single that got released to radio, but we did get to do some big concerts. He put us on some opening dates in Atlanta. We did this giant stadium show one time with Lynyrd Skynyrd had just done their first reunion since the plane crash.
Wow.
So that was 1988. So we literally played Fulton County Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia, where the Braves baseball team played. So,
what was that like walking on stage?
Oh, it was just mind-blowing. I probably came close to hyperventilating. I was so, not nervous, but just excited, man, And it was a proper bill. It was Lynyrd Skynyrd, Loverboy, the Georgia Satellites, one other band. And, we were the first, the unknowns that came out and kicked the whole thing off. But that band kind of quickly led to yet another band with a similar situation. They'd made a record, needed a band to put together to tour. The Delta Rebels is even more significant for me, Rod, because that's the first time I really started thinking about songwriting and coming in with riffs and an arrangement and starting to think about vocal melodies. Now that band had a really talented singer. When he said to me, clearly, he said, Damon, look, you have to learn to write songs because if you're just going to be a guitar player, you're going to be really limited in the opportunities that you might have going forward. No one had said that to me ever. I'd already been playing guitar, man, for going on almost 10 years. No one had ever said that to me. So that was valuable information.
How old are you at that point, roughly?
89, so I would have been 25.
Okay. So that it all is kind of leading up to Brother Kane, isn't it? All these experiences are gathering steam, and then having that experience in Delta Rebels and the singer telling you that, you need to start writing songs. And then lo and behold, in 1990, you are in Brother Kane and become the singer as well as the guitarist almost by default, from what I understand, because you couldn't actually find a singer at that point. But as you said earlier, you became the main songwriter and you got the record deal with Virgin. And then I think the first single, Got No Shame, actually headed to the top of the Billboard mainstream rock chart. After pushing for success, you just mentioned that you've been playing guitar for 10 years. What were you thinking when this started to happen? Were you thinking, we're on our way, this is it?
Well, I think when Brother Kane happened, Rod, so much stuff happened so quickly that when I reflect on that particular time, I just felt like I was trying to keep up. There never was any moment of like, oh, yeah, well, it's all going to happen for us now. Because remember, I'd been through 2 bands already with record deals, and both of them, no disrespect, failed gloriously. One record, one and done. And I just remember coming back to Birmingham and thinking, man, if either of those 2 bands can get a record deal, why can't I? Why can't I put my own band together in Birmingham, Alabama, write some songs, and start shopping it around. Because you got to remember, man, in 1990, rock music was still the cultural influence number one. You know, in fashion, MTV was everywhere. It was rock or subgenres of rock that were ruling the day. Record company A&R people were coming. They would come anywhere to hear a band. They would even come to Alabama. And you know, without getting too long-winded about that story, Rod, I'll never forget when before it was Brother Kane, the band was called Child with a Y, very fancy.
Yes.
CHYLD. But we wrote a couple good songs and we demoed them up. And through a relationship I had fostered in the Delta Rebels, I'd stayed in touch with a very prominent music lawyer. Well, man, I just called that guy straight up. He was in New York. And I'm back in Birmingham, like, hey, do you remember me and Damon? And he goes, oh, yeah, what's happening? I'm like, well, I got this band. He goes, send me the tape. So I sent him the tape. He loved it. He goes, wow, man. He goes, these songs are real. He said, do all these guys in the band look as cool as you did when I saw you last year? And I said, yeah, everybody looks pretty good, Fred. He goes, all right, this is what I want you to do. I want you to make 15 copies of cassette tapes. I want you to have all the song titles, and on the spine of the cassette, I want it to say Child, Birmingham, Alabama. And I said, why in the hell would you want to do that? You know, because we wanted to be in Los Angeles, or we wanted to be from New York. And he goes, no, Damon, listen, trust me on this. He goes, it's going to peg a lot of interest when these A&R people see a cassette from Birmingham, Alabama. He goes, because nobody is from Birmingham, Alabama.
It's good advice.
No,
Everyone
it was
from LA.
And brother, it totally paid off. We showcased for everybody.
And as you mentioned, Child morphed into Brother Kane, but it took a while for anything to happen. You parted ways with your singer and spent about 6 to 8 months trying out other guys looking for the right replacement. Meanwhile, Virgin had signed you to a development deal and they were paying for you to do demos, but they were also starting to run out of patience with the amount of time it was taking. And then one fateful night, your A&R guy comes to see you play in Birmingham with whichever singer you happen to have at the time, and he catches the part of the set where you sing a couple of covers and a light bulb goes off. And he pulls you up after the gig and says, effectively, you should be the singer. And despite your initial hesitance, you did become the singer of Brother Kane as well as playing guitar. Were you a natural frontman?
No. I was not a natural frontman. It is pretty mind-blowing to think, Rod, that I had to develop, not quickly, I had to develop immediately. I had to present like I was this seasoned, experienced performer, not just playing the guitar, but standing behind the microphone as well. So we had some challenges that first 6 months that I got behind the microphone, because you got to remember, man, this was the age of Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses and MTV and Poison and Bon Jovi and all these hair bands. You know, at the heart, man, I was much more kind of like a classic rock fan, like I mentioned earlier. You know, Deep Purple, Thin Lizzy, Leonard Skinner, Zeppelin, stuff like that. So, you know, man, I'd been playing the bars for the last 2 or 3 years with all these guys that are just emulating what they see on MTV because they think that's what it takes to be a star. So I'm not going to deny that I had some of that stamped into my brain. So one of the other great things that might have saved my career, Rod, was my manager, Conrad. He insisted on those first shows that we started doing with me as the singer. He insisted that we record the shows. He wanted to hear them because he wasn't going to go out to some nightclub that starts at 11 o'clock at night. You know what I mean? he had a business to run. So he's like, all right, you guys, I want that tape every day. Bring me that tape. So, man, after a couple shows, I get a phone call one afternoon, and he goes, Damon, I need you to come by the office. So I go down there, and Roddy puts the tape in the cassette machine, and he goes, have a seat, buddy. And he hits play, and he plays back. You know, it's the ending of some song, and the band sounds great, and I'm just crushing on the guitar, you know. And then I talk to the audience. And just let your imagination run wild, man. It's like, part Steven Tyler, part I don't even know what to compare it to, man. Look, Steven Tyler can talk like that because he's Steven Tyler. He's lived it and he's earned it. Conrad was doing all he could to just not blow his top, and he stopped the tape and he said, "Listen, buddy, you need to make a decision right now. Do you want to be Eric Clapton or do you want to be David Lee Roth?" It was like a light bulb moment for me. I was like, man, I've never thought about it that way. Well, we made that first album. I made a concerted effort to just not talk. Not to be standoffish, but to talk very little during the shows. You know what I mean? Just thank you very much. And man, very shortly we got a call right after we finished the record. This blues agent from Chicago called and said, "Hey, would the guys want to do some shows supporting Buddy Guy and then some other shows opening for Johnny Winter?" And come on, bro. We were so excited. We were like, oh my God. So, Conrad came to those first couple of shows and, man, this was a different crowd than the crowd we've been playing to at these hair band clubs in Birmingham.
Sure.
At the time. So I was much more prepared by that time than I would have been previously. And I'll never forget Conrad saying, "You're liking that we had that discussion about your stage banner now, aren't you, buddy?"
After the break, Damon talks about going on the road with Van Halen, the demise of Brother Kane, and his time with Alice Cooper and Thin Lizzy. Welcome back to Jaxsta's Humans and Music and my interview with Damon Johnson. In 1995, you went out and did about 20 shows with Van Halen, which, given how influential Eddie was on your guitar playing, must have been an incredible experience. What are your memories of Eddie and of that tour?
Well, it was so exciting and thrilling for me. Well, all the guys in the band, but me especially as the guitar player. And there was no one I worshipped more in my teenage years than Eddie Van Halen. So, by the time we supported Van Halen on the second album ride, we had already done a lot of big tours. We'd gone out with Robert Plant, we'd gone out with Aerosmith, a bunch of dates with Bad Company and Lynyrd Skynyrd. So, we'd played some big rooms, and I was kind of getting my rhythm about me as a front man and just, being the leader of Brother Kane. But when that call came in to support Van Halen, all that fell away, man, and I turned into that 18-year-old kid again, just like, oh my God, yes. So, yeah, man, I just can't overstate what a beautiful experience that was. Those guys treated us so good. There was no rock star standoffishness ever. Everybody in and out of the dressing room, and they would let us hang out on the side of the stage and watch the show, and just fantastic, man. And that was a special moment because Edward on that tour, they were touring in support of an album called Balance that they had put out that year. And Eddie was 100% sober. He had gotten sober. He wasn't drinking on the tour. He wasn't drinking at the hotels. There was none of that. He was making every effort to keep it clean. So he was just super articulate and funny, and he would answer all of my nerdy fanboy questions, and it was just so special. And I guess the biggest moment was when the tour made its way through our hometown of Birmingham, Alabama. And we got to open for my favorite band on the stage that I had seen them probably 5 times as a kid, every time they'd come through town. So it was just a dream. It's like a dream come true. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned Aerosmith and Robert Plant. So obviously you're in the orbit of these people such as Eddie Van Halen, Sammy Hagar, Robert Plant, Steven Tyler. What are you seeing? Like what's rubbing off on you? Are you learning things from all these people, both in the way they operate on stage and off?
Well, I know that I learned pretty much from everyone you just mentioned. I was taken with how personable they all were, and it let me realize quickly, like, hey man, that's a big part of having a career in this business. It's not about being ultra cool and wearing your sunglasses inside and being standoffish and like, hey, I'm a big deal, so I'm above you. None of those guys were like that. Robert Plant included. more than anyone, his normality and his ease of coming over and saying, "Oh, hey, Damon, I got this new record by this band, the Archangels. I want you to check it out. I think you'll like this." If Robert Plant can put his shoes on one at a time like you and I do, Rod, then that's a big statement for a young guy like me that got to be behind the curtain and see how things really work. So
Yeah.
that was the biggest takeaway from all those experiences, was just how cool everybody was, and I believe I've been committed to treating other bands and other artists that way, as I've had my own experiences beyond that. Alice Cooper, we had a lot of opening acts when I was with Alice. I know what that feels like, to roll up in your van, pulling a trailer with your gear, and on the giant stage with all this production, and you feel very, very tiny. And all those bands that Brother Kane opened for, they made us feel very relaxed and feel like we were a part of it. So I try to do that same thing.
Yeah. And with Brother Kane, you released 3 albums in the 90s, and then it came to a close. And I guess the band came to an end. I guess the 90s itself was an interesting decade because you had grunge, you had punk, you had new metal, you had boy bands, you had all these kind of big genres having their moment in the sun. And I guess you didn't really fit into any of those. I mean, was there a feeling of, did you feel like you didn't really belong?
We did. We did feel like we did not belong, Rod. And by the time we made our third record, it was crystal clear. It wasn't that we didn't belong. We just couldn't find a clique of bands to be a part of. We were too heavy for poppier bands like Train and the Goo Goo Dolls and stuff like that. But we weren't heavy enough to be rolling with Alice in Chains and Soundgarden and certainly the newest wave of like new metal bands that came out around that time, like Korn and Limp Bizkit and Rage Against the Machine. It's just there just wasn't any common ground there musically, sonically. So when you match that with the fact that the 4 of us had been on the road constantly for 7 years, sadly, everyone was having challenges in their personal life at that point, either substance issues or marital problems. And it was just a mess, Rod, at that time. And I just remember just kind of an exhale and just like, man, it's going to feel good to just stop this. And that's what we did. And I, unfortunately, myself, I got divorced that same year. And, but I met my current wife, Linda, shortly after that, and we started our life, and and that kind of in the next year or so kind of spilled over. It led into the other stuff I mentioned earlier, the John Waite phone call and Alice Cooper,
Sure.
stuff like that.
I mean, before you got the John Waite phone call, and I know you did the acoustic record Dust in 2000, but before you got the John Waite phone call and before you did that record, did you think you were done? Did you think it was over for you?
Yeah, I did a little bit. I took it personally, Brother Kane not truly succeeding. We did some amazing things and we had some fun, but man, we didn't really build our business. We couldn't sell hard tickets on our own. Not enough to, sustain, a little band and a little business, pay for our road crew and lease a bus and, we just never moved the needle enough to be able to do that. So I absolutely took some of that responsibility on myself. I just felt like I could have been a better front man. Maybe if I'd have had more experience in the beginning, maybe I could have written better songs. I don't know. You can imagine the guys and I and my managers, and we've all talked about it since then. It's like, look, man, we came out at a time, we were ill-timed. We either came out about 3 years too soon or 3 years too late. If things had have been, maybe less than that, a year either side, things could have been completely different. And you never know. But man, what an incredible experience! What valuable experiences I had.
And then you go out and you play with John Waite, and at the same time, or around about that time, one of the songs which you wrote with John Shanks, Every Day, was recorded by Stevie Nicks. And I know that you played guitar on Faith Hill's Cry as well. So was all of this kind of building back your confidence?
I think so. I certainly know when we got the call about Stevie wanting to record that song, I had a little publishing deal at that time, and my friend Sharona that helped me with all of that worked for EMI Publishing, she said, listen, Damon, this is an avenue for you. Just because you're not in a band anymore, this is a real song you've written here, and I can put you with other co-writers, and we can, And so I did a little more of that, when I could. I was still living in Birmingham, so I know I did consider moving to Los Angeles at that time because, obviously that's where most of the songwriting was happening in the rock world anyway. But, I had kids from my first marriage that, were there in Birmingham, and I just was not going to relocate and be away from them.
And we're going to jump forward a few years to 2004 when you join Alice Cooper's band. What happens when you join an organization like that? Like, what is your first day at work like?
Everything, again, was moving kind of fast then because my son Gabriel was born on a Tuesday, and I had to fly to Los Angeles for the audition for Alice Cooper's band 2 days later. I was literally at the hospital, Rod, sleeping in a chair with my wife in the bed and my new baby in his crib, and I got my Sony earphones on, like learning Alice Cooper songs in the hospital. So I remember feeling almost a little indifferent about getting the gig because I just had a new baby, because I lived in Alabama, because I was just doing some other things. And once again, I think it worked to my favor that I didn't walk into that room because Alice wasn't there for the audition. It was just the band. So, but they were videotaping everybody that, I think there were literally 7 or 8 other guys, that they were trying out. So, man, I just showed up with, a black t-shirt and my Chuck Taylor sneakers and a pair of jeans, and all these other guys that are auditioning, man, they look like they're going to a Motley Crue video shoot, man. They are so tricked out. And I remember getting out of the taxi and I thought, oh man, nobody told me I had to dress up. They're certainly not going to hire me. With my Les Paul and my blue jeans. But, man, we had the audition obviously went great. And I flew back home, and 3 days later, the phone rings, and it was Alice. And he said, hey, buddy, I saw the tape. You look like you've done this before. He goes, you're a really good backup singer. And I said, yeah, I sing a little bit. And it was like joining the circus, Rod. Joining the Alice Cooper band is like joining the circus. Part joining the circus because the shows are such a production, and then part it's like joining the PGA Tour because you play so much golf.
Did your game improve?
Very much. I mean, there's no way it couldn't improve, man. Playing, 4 or 5 days a week religiously. And, again, Alice was just so gracious. And, man, I stunk up a bunch of quality golf courses, man, with that guy. And he never complained. He never, he was just great. And he would give me tips and say, hey, buddy, be careful. You're moving your head a little too much on your backswing, stuff like that.
I mean, Alice Cooper's bands are serious bands. Do you know what I mean? Like that's a serious crew of musicians. What did you learn from being a part of that for I mean, how many years was it all up? It must have been about 6 or 7?
Well, it was really a total of 5 because in the middle, I worked on another one of my own bands for a couple of years, a band called Whiskey Falls. So I played with Alice 04, 5, and 6, and then I came back and played 9, 10, and part of 11 until I joined Thin Lizzy. So I was a fan of the original Alice Cooper band and those early records. $1 Billion Babies, Love It to Death, Killer, School's Out, all that stuff. And I hadn't really followed him beyond that, and he had his big comeback in the 80s with Poison, which was a huge hit, probably his biggest song. But at that point, man, I was starting to write my own songs, and I'd moved on to, I was more excited about Guns N' Roses and the Black Crowes at that time. So it really wasn't until after I joined his band that I did get a sense of like, wow, this is a serious band. Wow, look at the lineage of players that have come through here. Steph Burns, Dick Wagner, Steve Hunter, the people that have played on Alice's records, man. Steve Vai, Steve Lukather, Satriani played on some, Chris Cornell had co-written songs with Alice. I mean, clearly, man, he's rock and roll royalty. So I was very proud that of that opportunity to be a part of that, be a part of that history, man. He doesn't mess around when it comes to putting bands together.
What's the most bizarre thing you ever saw from stage, from an Alice Cooper stage?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind when you ask that question is the very first show I did with him. So Alice calls me, tells me I got the gig. He's like, you guys are going to rehearse for a couple of days in LA without me, but I'll see you in New Jersey at the first show. So I go to LA, rehearse. I already had all the songs down. Well, during the rehearsals, the guys are saying like, hey man, now listen right here, going into Dwight Fry, make sure you don't stand here because Alice is going to be in the straitjacket. And then, right here after Poison, stay away from stage right because the guillotine is going to come out. You know what I'm saying? Like all these props and all this production. Come on, man. I'd never had to think about anything like that. So we go to that first show in New Jersey, Rod, and it was an arena. It was packed. I remember the song was "Is It My Body?" It was my job to start the song. So I walk up to center stage and I start playing this greasy, funky guitar riff, 4 spotlights on me. I'm feeling like a god, Rod, okay? And then out of the shadows, Alice comes up to start singing, and he puts his elbow up on my shoulder. Well, he comes up into the spotlight, and he's got that damn python around his neck. No one had said anything to me about any, I guess it's a boa constrictor. No one had said anything, brother. I am soiling my pants, brother, and I can't move. I'm the only instrument making any music, right? I am mortified. So I just remember I looked over at Alice, I see the snake, and I just make a point to look down at my boots. And I'm playing the riff, and I'm like, I cannot wait for this first verse to end, and I'm getting the hell out of here. I mean, I can't think of anything more bizarre. What's more bizarre than that?
Look, David, just before we finish up, I just wanted to ask you a bit about your tenure in Thin Lizzy and then moving into Black Star Riders. And I know Thin Lizzy was such a pivotal band for you. I think the first time you saw them, they were supporting Ted Nugent when you were 15, and it pretty much changed your life. So what were your emotions then heading into that role and to play alongside Scott Gorham in Thin Lizzy?
To say that I was excited would be an understatement because those songs were a part of my DNA, Rod. They had so informed my guitar playing, my songwriting. I would reference Phil Lynott's songwriting, certainly during those Brother Kane days. I'd go, well, how would Phil sing a line like this? When I went into the rehearsal, that was the first time I actually met Brian Downey. I'd already met Scott Gorham a few years earlier, ironically, on a golf course with Alice Cooper. So, Scott and I had talked a little. And Scott was a major hero for me too, brother, as much as, right up there with Van Halen and the Skinner guys and Jimmy Page and anybody else. So, but we did that first show in San Antonio, was the very first show. And I was very emotional. I'll never deny that, man. I remember we came down the corridor, the dressing room, and up on the stage, and the curtain is down, and there's that big backdrop shimmering, with that incredible logo that Thin Lizzy has, and this logo I've worshipped my whole life. And and I had to swallow a big lump in my throat. I was like, oh my God, how is this happening? This is incredible.
When you think about some of the other things you've done in your life, like you wrote a song with Ted Nugent for his Craveman album, and again, going back to that gig that you saw when you were 15, he's obviously someone who you idolized as a kid. Another one of your songs, Just Feels Better, gets recorded by obviously Carlos Santana and Steven Tyler. Aerosmith again being a huge influence. Do you take, or have you been able to take a minute when these things happen and just think about how far you've come?
That's a great question. There's no doubt that I think about those achievements and accomplishments and I can't be more proud of them than I am. I will say that I think the fact that I have accomplished those things, it fuels me even more to try to make my own mark as a singer, as an artist, as a songwriter. You know, everything has changed so much about rock music. I've got no delusions, you know, like, oh, it's going to come back and it'll be the cultural influence that it used to be. That's not going to happen. But what I do know is that I do have my own tiny little pocket of fans, and they are just as passionate about songs that I have written and recorded and performed as I am the songs by all those heroes of mine that you just so eloquently named off. More than anything, that's where I want to leave my mark, is with my writing, my songs, my career. You know, I guess really that's what brings you and I together today, Rod. You know, I'm putting out a new record. I got a great team around me, and I don't take any of it for granted. So I believe I've got some time left, you know, and I just feel like there's a lot of work to be done. And I intend to deliver it with as much quality and with as great of an output as I possibly can.
Very last question, Damon. Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due. Are there people that you would give credit to for helping you get where you are today?
Yes, thank you. Maximum credit to my wife, Linda. You know, when we met in 2000, it was a game changer for me. And she's been so supportive of all of these things that I've done, and, you know, the growth I've made as an artist and as a husband and a father. You know, in recent years, though, I got to give a lot of credit to my bandmates. Jared Pope on drums. Jared and I met way back in 2008 when I did that country band I mentioned, Whiskey Falls, and I knew he was a special talent. So I give him a lot of credit, man, for standing by me 3 years ago when I said, hey, man, I'm gonna depart Black Star Riders and I'm gonna do this solo thing full time. You know, and just all the musicians. There's so many musicians that I've shared a pen with, you know, an acoustic guitar, handing it back and forth, trying to write something, or I've shared a stage with them. It's almost too many to mention, but definitely a lot of credit to Ricky Warwick, who I wrote songs with in Black Star Riders. He really helped kind of reignite my desire to get back behind the microphone and tell my own stories. And I want to give a shout out to my dear friend Mark Phillips. Rod, Mark was the singer in that band I mentioned that I moved to Birmingham to join. And sadly, we just lost Mark to COVID-19. And as I was reflecting to his daughter, you know, I wouldn't be here right now. I wouldn't have this career. You can't convince me otherwise. I don't believe I would have had this career had it not been for Mark walking into some bar and seeing me play guitar and go back to his bandmates and say, hey, man, we got to get this kid. We got to get him in our band. And it changed my life. I would be remiss not to mention Mark right now, for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry to hear that he passed. That's very sad, but he obviously had a huge impact on your life.
Indeed, he did. Thank you.
Well, Damon, thank you so much for all your time and for sharing these stories. It's been great chatting with you. I really appreciate it.
Rod, it's been a pleasure, my friend.
And that's it for another episode of Humans of Music. A big thanks to Damon for his time, and thank you for listening. This episode was mixed by Lachlan Mitchell from Parliament Studios in Annandale, and the incidental music and theme song were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Please remember to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, share it amongst your friends and rate and review it. And remember, next time you need to know who wrote a song, who produced a song, who engineered it, who played on it, who sang on it, who did anything on it, head to jaxsta.com for all your official music credit information. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for listening.